Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar tonight. My name is Christina. I'm going to be moderating for us today. I would like you to know that you will hang tight with me for just a minute, and we'll get started after all of our attendees come in. Please do think about opening up your Q&A box. That's how we're going to be taking your questions today. And we'll just give it a few minutes as we get started. If you have any questions or are having any technical difficulties, shoot me a note in the chat box and I'll do my best to help you.
Check, 1, 2, you see about the president man. Roll up my sleeves as I face the congregation. First thing I knew is free education. And every third period, we practice meditation. Every third period, we practice meditation like a brown Robin Hood. I take from the rich and give to the poor. So my little sister ain't gotta be hungry no more. Wow, man. But you know what? My first lady would be my mom, cause she'd smack me in the head if I was dropping bombs, and I free my poor black and brown. And I free my poor black and brown that got caught up in 3 strikes. And when they get out, they get a free bite, so they can ride to the future. Cause the last shall be first, and first shall be last. So everybody sing like we were at MASH. Me gusta la lima, me gusta limón, pero no me gusta tanta corrupción. Me gusta la lima, me gusta limón, pero no me gusta tanta corrupción.
Hi, everybody. If you're just joining us, my name's Christina. I'm so happy you're here today. We will get started in just a couple of minutes, but until then, please go ahead and open your question and answer box. You'll find that at the bottom of your menu on your computer screen, and that's how we're going to be collecting questions today as our panelists discuss this very important issue with us. If you're having any technical difficulties or questions, I have the chat box wide open, so just reach out to me and I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot. Again, Christina here in Wisconsin, just helping to moderate and keep things moving smoothly today. I'm so glad you're here and very excited to learn more along with the rest of you for today. We're just going to leave it open for a couple of minutes in order to make sure everybody can get in before we get started.
Me gusta la lima, me gusta limón, pero no me gusta tanta corrupción. Gusta la lima, me gusta limón, pero no me gusta tanta corrupción. My people, it's 2017. We ain't got time to wait on no president, no governor, no Congress. It's on each and every one of us in our home, our community, and our family to make that change. So do it. Take that next step.
For those of you just joining us, my name is Christina. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to get started here in just a minute or two. So thank you for being here. I would like you to know that you can open up your chat box. If you'd like to chat with us, it's wide open. I'll be monitoring that throughout tonight's call. But also, your question and answer box is your go-to in order to ask the panelists any questions. So find that on the bottom of your screen if you're joining us from a laptop, and we will be sure to collect any questions. Veronica, thank you so much for asking about whether this will be recorded. It will, and we'll be sharing it out to all of our attendees. So thank you, and get that Q&A box open, folks.
Me gusta la lima, me gusta limón, pero no me gusta tanta corrupción.
To People's Pandemic Research for the People webinar, community webinar. And I'm Dr. Edgar Rivera Colón. I'm also a reverend. That's why I'm wearing this collar. Don't worry, I won't be asking for donations, but other people will. It's good to see everyone here. We have a great webinar for you. And our orientating question today is, can a people's programming collective choice help bring back public health? And a lot of times, I'm a public health scientist, so I actually teaching in medical school. I'm a medical anthropologist by training. Really got my beginning in HIV/AIDS work amongst Black and Latinx folks, LGBTQ communities in New York City. And really, one of the questions we're always asking is, what does the public mean in public health? And today we're going to have a webinar full of people, two panelists, two panels that will help us think through these issues. We'll have people from the labor movement, we'll have people from the academia, people from different community movements, uh, people who are clinicians, and we'll have people who are ecologists, and also people who do evolutionary biology, who are basically scientists for the people. And this is one of the questions we're asking ourselves. Fascism, the time of the new Confederacy rising again. Not that they ever left the field of political combat, but they're having a comeback in a certain way. What is our duty, and how can we work collectively? Given, as Rob tells us all the time, Dr. Rob Wallace, that the people who run this society are in their last phases of accumulation, what can we build from the ground up that'll be effective in protecting people from all kinds of things: violence, climate change, structural violence, the kind of disappearances we're seeing right now, with folks who aren't in regular status, or actually, whether they're in regular status or not is important, who have opinions that the Trump administration doesn't like. That's really what we're talking about. So, folks, I'm going to hand it over to Rob. I'm not going to talk a lot. I can do that later. And I want to introduce you to my brother and comrade, Dr. Rob Wallace. I'll give you a more extensive biography later on when I'm introducing the panels. And I just want to say it's lovely to see everyone out here. I know it's been a hard time, and sometimes we begin to despair, but the thing I would say is don't catastrophize, operationalize. Don't catastrophize, operationalize. And right now, we're operationalizing with Dr. Wallace. Go ahead, Rob.
Great. Thanks a lot, Edgar. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm Rob Wallace. I'm with the Pandemic Research for the People, and we'll be hearing more from me later, but I wanted to introduce Pandemic Research for the People to start. We're a crowd-funded effort started in March 2020 by the Agroecology Rural Economics Research Corps to look at research questions around the then emergent pandemic from the vantage of everyday people. We just were at that moment hearing everything from the people in power at that point, so we wanted something else. In the early pandemic, we had a number of working groups looking at and publishing dispatches about COVID in its urban context, its rural context, and in its agroecological origins. In 2022, we helped co-found the People CDC. We spent the next couple of years over there collaborating before circling back in 2024 to do the kind of research scientists and community members can conduct together. For the past year, we've been meeting nearly weekly to discuss the relationship between collective choice and public health. And, you know, why would we turn to the most basic of societal categories? Well, at that moment, the Biden administration effectively abandoned its COVID effort in order to return students back to school, whatever the state of the actual infections, in order to return their parents back to work. And to do so, the administration deserted public health in both concept and in deed. And it switched to the you do you individualism that neoliberalism had been graduating to over the past 50 years. And so now they were doing it during an emergency. In this case, they were rolling back masking and quarantining recommendations, even in hospitals, eventually defunding during an emergency testing and vaccination programs. And one wonders where the new Trump administration got its notion to end all state COVID funding and long COVID research, given that Biden had declared the pandemic over in May of 2023. So one administration helps set the situation for the next. Now, last month, we posted the results of our year-long investigation in a dispatch that Christina's going to post in the link to in the chat. And it offers basics in the literature, modeling collective choice, a brief history of public health, our present COVID and bird flu moment, and how labor unions and community groups pursued collective choice in the course of promoting and protecting public health. Now, excerpts of that of sections on the labor union responses to COVID were recently adapted for Truth Out. Just published it a couple days ago. Christina will also put the link to that article in the chat as well. So we're here today to talk about parts of this dispatch, but we've also invited several distinguished guests to present their own work in organizing around or researching these topics. Now, Pandemic Research for the People, or PrEP, began as an emergency response in March of 2020. We're not a 501(c)(3), and we presently don't have a fiscal sponsor, although we're looking for that for the future. But for the most part, remain a crowd-funded effort. And we would deeply appreciate your contributions, however little you can offer, to help pay for some of the organizational incidentals, like annually renewing our internet domain name and our server subscription, things like that. So Christina's going to post our present donation options in the chat as well. Now, before turning to the panels, we wanted to take stock of our historical moment, right? It's been crazy since, well, it's been crazy for a while, but certainly since the turn of the year. And we had invited Dr. Rupa Marat, the co-author of Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice, to give us a state of the union in terms of its politics and the public and its public health. Unfortunately, she won't be able to join us today. She continues to be harassed by her employer, the University of California, for her advocacy for the Palestinian people. And she isn't the only one. Just the last couple days, the NSF just posted expectations that no institution receiving NSF funds will engage in BDS campaigns against the apartheid. So we're going to see more of this. Unfortunately, she's the beginning of what seems to be a new McCarthyite campaign. So what we're going to do here instead is to have our moderator, Edgar Rivera Colón, offer his summary of our moment, and then we'll field 2 questions from the Q&A about your notions about the state of things. There might be questions, there might be comments, and then from there we'll turn over to our first panel. So Edgar, you have the floor, and let us know what's going on out there.
Okay. So one of the things I would, first of all, let's just keep Rupa in our minds and hearts as she goes through this. And you're right, there's a parallel between the McCarthy period and what's happening here in the weaponizing of anti-Semitism as a way to repress people, including Jews, anti-Zionist Jews who are in the forefront of the Palestinian solidarity movement. I'm going to talk as both a social scientist, a medical anthropologist, and also as a movement chaplain. I was ordained to be a movement chaplain. So my work is really, like last Friday, I was with supermarket workers who are looking to get a new contract. I've been working a lot with mental health workers, Kaiser Permanente, which is a beast of a corporation, insurance, medical insurance, they have hospitals. And these people have been out for 7 months, and they've been asking for very basic stuff. The supermarket workers want to work more than 24 hours a week in Los Angeles so they can put food on the table of their families. And what I'm seeing, first from sort of the ground up, is an enormous mobilization of young people, a recapitulation of what happened during Black Lives Matter, during the pandemic, during Katrina, and now with the Palestinian solidarity encampments and the mobilizations of people around the Palestinian genocide, is we see young people engaging in all types of mutual aid. What does that mean? Mutual aid is really a tactic of developing dual power, a tactic of developing institutions run by the people, for the people, not controlled either by the not-for-profit industrial complex or the state or its corporate entities. And so we're seeing and I'm sure everyone here can talk about what's happening in their localities. And one of the things that historically the left, and I consider myself a Christian Marxist, therefore a member of the left in the United States, hasn't had the kind of projection at a national level that we need to address the fascism that we're seeing. What do we call it? Do we call it fascism? Do we call it the new Confederacy? Do we call it the acceleration with the white evangelicals, the accelerationist tech bros with the white evangelicals, with the corporate elites, with the universities capitulating? So obviously it's a coalition of elite forces that have a mass base, and we're in a position where we're going to have to mobilize to arrest their forward march, but also to build alternatives. The thing that I would say in the United States that I think is important, and I hope we can discuss this, is we're at an epochal shift. We're at a moment where, again, Rob Wallace riffing on Emmanuel Wallerstein, Oliver C. Cox, Samir Amin, a bunch of thinkers, where the bourgeoisie in this country, the elites in this country, the economic political elites, and I don't make too much of a distinction between Democratic elites and Republican elites. There are differences, but not significant. They're certainly not strategic differences. They have decided to cash out, right? Just like they built factories that my father, Puerto Rican worker, worked in the 1950s and 60s, and they built public libraries, and they built universities. They built the university that I went to get my doctorate, Rutgers, a land-grant university. They're now cashing out. They're destroying those institutions. And what they're doing is what I learned in the 80s from all these old Black Panthers in New York City and all these new communist movement people that I got to know as a young person, that capitalism is always already in the United States pre-fascist. It's just a matter of what conjuncture has to exist for the fascism to come out. And we know that because we know the history of this country. We know what happened in Reconstruction. We've read our W.E.B. Du Bois and understood that what we're seeing right now is a racialized form of that beautiful chapter in Black Reconstruction, beautiful and scary, the counter-revolution of property. That's what we're seeing, of the counter-revolution of white property in a settler colonial state. And I'm a product of American imperialism, because if Puerto Rico hadn't been invaded in 1898, I would not be talking to you right now, because my parents would have not met in New Jersey as a result of being expelled from the Puerto Rican economy. So what I want all of us to think about, and I'm working at the grassroots as a social movement chaplain, is how are we connecting, and how do we make that jump to the national level to create a united front? One of the problems historically is usually when you have a united front, you usually have socialist and communist parties and labor parties that are really strong. We don't have that right now, but it doesn't mean we can't build it. And what I see with our young folks, what I see with professionals, really, the professional managerial classes, all those NIH nerds who just lost their jobs, they weren't expecting that. They weren't expecting that from one day to another, they would lose their jobs in DC and their livelihoods. For me, as a revolutionary, that might be a basis for people considering, what is this system? And can we return to the old protocols of institutions of basically neoliberalism to solve the problem now? This is really the question that's at the core. And there's a lot of what I would call, and my comrade Sal Marx, I know their name is Marx. I know it's a coincidence of history. Maybe it's God's grace. I don't know. But we just did a piece of artwork that was called lucid dreaming denial. And I think a lot of people are still in that lucid dreaming denial, where we want to return to the old ways that weren't as bad, at least we think, than is now. And the joker in the box is climate change. The joker in the box is climate catastrophe. The joker in the box is what happens when a new virus occurs, like the avian flu virus, H5N1, H5 and X, and Rob Wallace has been on this case for a while, right? So what happens, right? And so we need to think about all these things. And this is not about doom and gloom, right? This is about, what is the conjuncture? What are our forces aligned? How do we build our forces? How do we protect all the people who are basically doing the work? And how do we expand our social networks in what's most revolutionary for us all as human beings, in creative love, in creating alternatives, active alternatives to what's happening now? to me, that's the State of the Union. It's brief. I'm used to preaching long sermons. So this is more a short analysis. And I hope that we can continue to have these conversations. I'm looking forward to the questions in the Q&A. And comrades, siblings, all of these good folks together, we're going to do this work together. The work is in front of us. We have a tradition of doing this work. We don't come here empty-handed. We come with our ancestors, with the struggles that we've had, and we come with many, many tools of helping each other and being interdependent and holding on to each other. I'm going to stop there, and now we're going to start thinking about our next step, which will be, of course, Christina is going to give us, I think, 2 questions, and I'm not going to ask myself a question, right? So
Please, we have plenty of questions for you.
Okay.
Ask yourself questions. We got you. Creative love, that's so beautiful. And speaking of that, I'm seeing so much love and solidarity coming in, for the people that are facing these struggles. So thank you all who are with us tonight for weighing in and just sending your love and solidarity. Our first question, Jamie H., if you don't mind my reading your question out loud, I'm going to do it. And it is, what can new healthcare practitioners do to support efforts beyond masking themselves? Jamie just graduated and has infection-related concerns about working in the field. She's not yet working and will have no degree of seniority for some time here now. So what suggestions do you have for her and others like her as to how to best approach advocacy at this stage?
Yeah, and we're aware, Jamie, since I teach at a medical school, how paramilitary the structure of healthcare is in the United States and how seniority is the key, right? So my experience has been that medical students at year 1 have one experience. In my time, they're in their 3rd year, they want to leave the profession. And they want to leave the profession because there's so many rules and so many hierarchies. So my sense is that, first of all, do all you can, right? And Joe is going to give us the sort of the model, the Swiss cheese model, to help us. Do all you can to protect yourself and others, right? Masking, everything you need to do on that front, but also create a group of people at your same level and also do analysis of the institution. Who could be an ally? Who is not going to be an ally? Who's going to be sort of a political non-entity, and what spaces are there, right? So within, this is basically what Gramsci called sort of the trenches of civil society, right? The war of position, not the war of maneuvers. So I hear your fear, and I'm afraid right now because I don't know what's going to happen with the avian flu virus. There's basically an evolutionary experiment occurring right now where we're rolling the dice to see what happens. And we don't know what's going to happen on that tip. So I'm afraid of that. And I'm especially afraid for our elders and folks who are disabled and folks who are immune compromised. So my sense is that the individual scale, I think your question already on some level anticipates this, is not the key scale of intervention. It has to be at the meso and the group level. Who are your people? Who are the people you can trust? And in the institution, who are the people you have to guard yourself from? Assume that every institution you're in is riven with class struggle, with racial injustice, with gender oppression, right? That the institutions of medicine are settler colonial institutions and have all those contradictions. So you have to sort of figure that out. The other rule is try not to catastrophize, but operationalize. Act. What are the actions I can do within this structure? And also, you got to be outside. You got to be in the community. It could be anything. It could be just a group that meets at a bookstore. It could be a faith group. It could be a union group. We got a lot of union people here. It could be with your masjid or with your folks at your temple, whatever. And so I would say make sure that you have the inside-outside dialectic going on, because what bourgeois institutions do, especially the medical institutions, is isolate you, and they bring out the cultural professionalism, and that's how they begin to sort of knock you out first. I hope that
Thank
helps.
you. Yeah, thank you. That was a great answer. And thanks to the folks weighing in our question and answer box. We're going to get to everybody as we go along, but so much good wisdom coming at us. I think we're though ready right now for our introduction of our panel number one, Edgar, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Christina. And thank you for doing all this stuff. I know this is a lot of stuff that you're doing right at being the moderator. So panel one is entitled simply, deceptively so, Labor, COVID-19, and Public Health. And we're going to be hearing from Steve Striffler, who's the director of the Labor Resource Center at UMass Boston, and co-editor with Nick Juvarvich of the recently published The Pandemic and the Working Class, How U.S. Labor Navigated COVID-19 from the University of Illinois Press. Buy the book, folks. We have to buy the books that our comrades read, and then maybe maybe you won't have somebody else buy it, but then share it. All right, share it. Steve writes on labor and the left in Latin America. I want to talk to Steve, and the United States, and is the author of Solidarity, Latin America and the U.S. left in the era of human rights, and co-editor with Aviva Chomsky, of Organizing for Power, Building to a 21st Century Labor Movement in Boston. Listen to the specificity of that, the locality of that, in Boston. Steve will speak on the importance of the labor movement and labor unions in particular for protecting and advancing public health. And Christina should put the link there of his book. And then I'm going to introduce the other panelists as well. I'm going to go all the way, and then we're going to start. Okay, Steve? So just be patient. I'm with you, brother. Deborah Wallace, who I love, is a public health ecologist. She's used transferred ecological analytical approaches to urban functioning and public health. When I was doing my work of AIDS in New York City, she was a lifeline for thinking. And she has, with her husband, co-worker, Rod Wallace, she studied the cause of dynamics and consequences of 1970s massive housing destruction in New York City for almost 50 years. Among many books they co-authored, A Plague on Your House, that was the book that saved me, and The Right to Work Laws and the Crumbling of American Public Health. Deborah will speak on obesity, diabetes, and the right to work laws. And our next panelist, certainly, not least in any way, Joe Sexauer is Director of Membership Services and Organizing for the Racine Educators United, REU, in Wisconsin. Prior to that, he was an attorney who helped represent several unions, as well as victims of wage theft. He has participated in the labor movement since the late 1990s, including as a member, then union representative of Teamsters 743 in Chicago, and a union representative for meatpacking workers in Southeast Wisconsin. Joe will be talking about unions and COVID and how unions and other organizations need to update their safety tools for the next pandemic or whatever safety problems they work to solve. So let's begin with Steve, comrade, brother Steve. Bring it.
Okay. Hey, thanks for that introduction, Edgar. That was great. And I really enjoy the energy you bring. And thanks to everyone here for coming as well. I'll just jump in. Not sure if this is what folks were looking for, but I'll just start. I thought I'd start just by noting sort of the centrality of labor unions for public health. That's sort of so obvious that it's almost underappreciated, in the sense that, most of labor movement's earliest battles centered on health-related issues, workplace injuries, unsafe working conditions, long work days, and many health-related gains that working people have made: minimum wage, health insurance, Social Security, Medicare, retirement. All these things are kind of unimaginable without labor unions. And of course, many of those benefits have extended to working people who are not in unions, kind of this broader benefit of unions. The flip side of this, of course, is that the decline of unions from the 1970s onwards then kind of has to be seen as a dramatic threat to public health, both in sort of the narrow sense that many of the gains just mentioned have been eroded as unions have lost power in the workplace, but also right in the broader sense that declining union power has meant both increasing inequality, which itself is a threat to public health, but has led to a political system that is really controlled by a dominant class that has successfully sought to gut public goods kind of more broadly. So stepping back just for a second, when the 28-29 recession hit, this sort of illusory promise that I think both Democrats and Republicans have been selling us, that is that neoliberalism would kind of deliver. This was exposed, I think, to more and more people as kind of a fraud. And many working folks not only began to lose faith in neoliberalism, which I think was a good thing, but also in democratic government, as it sort of increasingly seemed as though the political and economic system was no longer capable really of delivering enough to enough people to retain kind of even like a basic legitimacy. And it seemed more and more to more folks that it was kind of rigged. And Trump, in a sense, jumped into that political space caused by this fracturing of neoliberal hegemony with his victory in 2016 and sort of shocked the political establishment and struck, among other things, at the heart of kind of neoliberal orthodoxy, at what Democrats and Republicans have been selling us, right? In the sense that free trade, he insisted, had done nothing for working people. America's borders had to be established, walls built, immigrants expelled, aspects of globalization reversed, et cetera. But I think it's also worth noting, or at least remembering, that in that same decade leading to Trump's first sort of ascendance from the 2008 recession until his first election in 2016, progressive forces also blossomed as that sort of neoliberal order fracture. And we could go on, right? Black Lives Matter, Occupy. And Bernie's run, I think in some ways in 2016, was in some sense the culmination kind of this longer process in the sense that it at the very least put into serious question core beliefs about the primacy of the market, about government intervention in the economy that really had guided U.S. policymaking in the United States in a sense for decades. And although Trump won, of course, in 2016, his victory in some ways pushed the progressive attack on neoliberalism kind of even more into the mainstream. And I think that a tendency that really deepened further with the pandemic, right? The pandemic made it clear that neoliberal policies had left the nation kind of wildly unprepared to meet this national crisis, something that I think our book tries to talk about with respect to various pandemic struggles around health, safety, and job security in the healthcare, education, and hospitality industries, and sort of also why being in a union during this period kind of really mattered to working people. And nevertheless, within sort of the first, I guess, 3 years under Biden, we saw some like remarkable shifts in policymaking approaches, right? There was big legislation, the American Rescue Plan, Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, a series of acts that sort of made it seem like policymaking might be guided with the goal of rebalancing power in the economy kind of in a more equitable way. That is, that government spending could work, you know, maybe to redistribute wealth downward instead of upwards, and would serve to strengthen public goods, and particularly a more robust public healthcare system. Obviously, this wasn't enough, either politically or in terms of improving the material conditions of working people. Among other things, despite all the spending under Biden, a central dogma of neoliberalism really remained intact, and that is that the rich and their wealth remain untouchable on some level for both political parties. And so for all the hope that Bidenomics sort of signaled this New Deal in the end, right, it seems now that it's more of a gap between two Trump presidencies, with the second one being far worse than the first, it seems anyway. To finish up, then, I'll say we're kind of at a key moment when it's absolutely essential for the left and the labor movement to find ways to connect with growing numbers of working people, and to do so by offering compelling explanations for the conditions we find ourselves in and plausible strategies for fighting back. Trumpism obviously won't be defeated by politicians inside the Beltway. It'll only be defeated by millions of people coming together in a really strong political movement that says no to authoritarianism, no to huge tax breaks to the richest, no to the profound threat that Trump's second administration really represents for public health. And I guess just to end, as problematic and complicated as labor unions and the labor movement can be, it's hard, at least for me, to imagine the emergence of this stronger political force without a revitalized labor movement that is one with stronger and more militant labor unions kind of at its center. And I'll just leave it there. And I'm not sure if that's what people were looking for, but I think I'm at about 5 minutes, so I'll stop.
Hey, thank you so much, Steve. You're right. Yeah, that's hot. That's hot. That's what I would say. Christina, did you want to say something?
I would just want to remind everybody, if you have any reactions to that very interesting and passionate statement that was just made, please do let us know in the Q&A box, guys, because we're going to get to your questions real soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve, for that offering and that intervention. Yeah, Biden's smelling like Carter. sort of a one-off. And also, right, without a militant labor movement, where are we really? And now we will have from the Bronx live, Dr. Deborah Wallace. Hello, Deb.
Hello. I'm going to talk about right-to-work laws and contagious risks. As examples, I will use obesity and diabetes. The COVID pandemic focused our attention on contagious diseases. However, behaviors are also contagious. Risk behaviors sweep through vulnerable populations that use them as coping mechanisms for structural stress. Right-to-work laws disempower labor unions by forbidding the requirement that workers at a unionized work site join the union and pay dues. In 2015, 26 states had right-to-work laws. These states espouse the Reagan doctrine of individualism with deeply hierarchical socioeconomic structures. Labor unions fall within Galbraith's category of countervailing forces, the forces that keep the quasi-monopolies from completely destroying us. States where a critical mass of workers can exert some control over working conditions have a spectrum of various countervailing forces and exert less structural stress on their populations than the anti-collectivist states. Chronic structural stress deforms the sleeping and eating biological clock and causes accelerated aging. Deformation of the biological clock results in raised consumption of energy-rich comfort food, resulting in obesity. Obesity poses many risks: diabetes, coronary heart disease, stroke, certain cancers. Obesity became epidemic in the United States in the late 1980s, with West Virginia and the Louisiana-Mississippi area as its epicenters. CDC maps beginning in 1999 of the spread of obesity show that every year brought new spread and new intensification in the already infected states. It was like a disease going through the country, a germ disease. Obesity prevalence differs significantly between right-to-work and non-right-to-work states, and I need to do a screen share here. So let's see how this works. All right, I have to get to what's happening here. This is not working.
All right. All you need to do maybe is to stop your screen share and make sure your browser is.
Oh, here, I think we're here.
We're on your
got it.
desktop. So if you stop your screen share right now and want to.
Stop the screen share?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen. You're okay. Just click on your PDF. You'll be okay. There you go.
There we go. Okay, here we go. All right. This is an example of what happens to public health between right to work and non-right to work. In the 2007-2009 period, the right to work states had a much higher percent of obese people. And this probability here, which is very low, is the probability that these two rates are actually the same. It's very low. But by 2015, the divide between right to work and non-right to work states widened greatly. And this probability went down to near zero. So there are a much higher percent of obese people in right to work states. This has a consequence on diabetes. And these are the diabetes deaths per 100,000 people with different age ranges. There's a 25% difference in early middle age between the right to work and non-right to work states. There's an almost 25% difference in late middle age between the right to work and non-right to work states. And there's still a huge difference in early old age between the right to work and non-right to work states. This early difference shows the accelerated aging and the greater obesity in the right to work states. Now, these are just a couple of examples. Huge differences in all kinds of public health, ranging from the percent of adults that eat vegetables by day, percent of adults who smoke, the fatalities from vehicle accidents, infant mortalities, mortalities of children between 1 and 5 years of age, coronary heart disease. I mean, it's a whole smear. Gonorrhea incidents. There's a huge difference between right to work and non-right to work states. So the right to work laws had a huge impact on public health because they impeded unionization. Hierarchy and power abuse probably cost more lives through risk behavior coping mechanisms than even the highly publicized germ diseases. Labor unions throw a monkey wrench into hierarchical structure. That's what I have to say. So I will stop the share.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. And that note that you ended, hierarchy and political abuse can be mitigated by people joining unions, right? And it also stops people from joining unions. And now we have Joe Sexauer, and he'll be talking about unions in COVID and how unions and other organizations need to update their safety tools the next pandemic or whatever safety problem they're working to solve. Joe coming in from Wisconsin. Give us some Wisconsin love, brother.
Thank you, Edgar. So even at the historical lows of numbers and power, many U.S. unions did a lot around COVID. Unions can be many things. They can be democracies, they can be armies, they can be things that inspire you, things that break your heart. And I would argue they could also be seen as social antibodies fighting pandemics or social murder. One of the union advantages is that it forces you structurally when you're organizing to organize, not just to mobilize a group of like-minded people. But you can take your best fighters and pick and win fights, but you are still building a base around that core of fighters. You have to convince others who disagree with you, who work with you with words and actions to both think and act together. So you can take AFG, the union that represents the VA hospitals. After 9/11, the VA started planning for several contingencies, not only terrorist attacks, but also pandemics. And like smart negotiators, the union turned pandemic policy under the Bush administration into contract language during Obama. Union workers at the VA had pandemic language in the contract before COVID, which is very rare and aggressively foresighted. Trump was president during the COVID, and his administration ignored that language during the start of COVID. But you can also look at public schools. They are the largest routine public gatherings in most counties. And like hospitals and nursing homes, huge opportunities for public health, but with higher union density in public schools. And many educator unions ran the table on COVID. I know in Racine, we definitely did that. We used over a dozen tactics to supplement very aggressive grievance handling, flooding the zone with safety problems, and winning all of them, even if HR denied all of our formal grievances. And this couldn't have happened without three things: an organized base, a local president not only giving that base space, but encouragement and direction, and the National Education Association in DC providing us with experts to teach us words like MERV 13, 7 air exchanges an hour, and negative pressure rooms. So without the NEA's health and safety department, we definitely would have lost at the table what we won in the street. The union won, the public sector union in Wisconsin won this all 10 years after Scott Walker destroyed collective bargaining and some unions, but not collective activity. And sometimes people conflate these three things. You don't have to have collective bargaining rights to win the things at the bargaining table. The most popular example is the historic and current Memphis sanitation workers with AFSCME, who have a memorandum of understanding and not a contract. And if REU, this union, without bargaining rights in a broke school district can win these things, it should be on every union's plate. One of the big takeaways I got from this is that in pre-vaccine pandemic, we definitely could have had a safety model upgrade. And I want to kind of share the Swiss cheese model here. So this is close to an example of what we used here, which is union safety people will recognize this as blame the worker. So here's different. Swiss cheese model is different interventions that have problems in them. But here, this is just you, the worker, and you alone's responsibility and fault. Here is a more thorough one that has misinformation mice, but still the individual, the employee, the consumer. So all the me and never the we. Further models broaden to have individual or personal responsibilities and shared responsibilities, but no accountability, no specific organization in charge. So the boss, your workplace is still not there. And here's a more broad one that has government or corporate responsibilities, but more generally with misinformation mice, which I think is a useful thing. And here, finally, is one that's, I think, would probably is the best one I have found, that has a large variety of personal responsibilities, but also a large variety of a specific employer's commitments to action, which are important. Still, the union isn't in this model. Where is the union in this model other than implied? There's the corporate form of the owners, but not the corporate form of the workers. So I would also, could there be a power analysis for each slice of cheese? So who's the material basis for the HVAC slice, so the engineering slice? For each building and for state and federal indoor air quality legislation. And I would guess it's the architects who design them and the workers who install them. So the Sheet Metal Workers Union, or SMART. A local rep of SMART called me last year and asked if we had any ARPA money left to spend on upgrading HVACs, which we didn't, but because we had already gotten all that upgraded. But other locals had not, and I referred them to them. So SMART deserves all of our support in building indoor air quality and demanding a return to this country for their member, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who has been disappeared. Could the Swiss cheese model could there be a collection of Swiss cheese models for every health and safety problem at work? And this can be available so all people like me don't have to, grab the blame the worker model off the internet next time. And just kind of summarizing that COVID and all pandemics teach us that the labor movement slogans aren't selling pie in the sky, but like the golden rule, grounds us in the material reality that an injury to one is an injury to all.
Good. Thank you so much, Steve and Deb and Joe. And what I'm gonna do is, do we have any questions, Christina, before I ask my question that's coming from our participants?
We have a few reflections. I think it would be appropriate for you to ask your question first.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I guess the question I really have for the panel is, what is it about being part of a collective like a union, right, that moves people towards action? And I guess what I'm asking is, what are the kind of experiences you've noticed in your research or your union work that allow people to begin the process of solving real concrete social problems in a collective way? And because that's not the way we're raised in the kind of template individualism in the US as a general proposition. So in your observations, in your research, in your being members of unions and being reps in unions, what is it that, our audience can take away and say that's, or at least part of what the answer is for us these days? And I'll just start with Joe and then we can go around.
Just structurally too, Stott and Lynn pointed out that labor law is the only law that requires two or more people to actually to be enforced. So literally every other law is an individual right, not a group right. And so structurally it forces that. It allows It's hard to overcome fear by yourself. I don't think you can overcome fear without any kind of group work. And it's, I think I'm smart as the next guy, but I'm not as smart as 5 other people in the room, for sure, thinking on a problem. And I think that working through people helps you identify problems and solve them. And that, I don't think there's any other way. It's also ridiculously fun and addictive.
Always go for the fun. That's one thing that the AIDS movement told me. That pleasure is also a form of politics. Excellent. Thank you so much. Deb, why don't you go, and then we'll end up with Steve, and then we'll see if Christina has any questions for us. Oh, just open up your mic.
Yes, I opened up my mic. I was a member of the Newspaper Guild for almost 20 years. We met, our site unit met monthly. And between the meetings, we had discussions, we'd have lunch together. We helped each other feel free to be empowered. And this was really important. The different people had different talents, and by being together, they felt support enough to apply their talents to the union activities. And I think that's a very important thing. It's a kind of paradox that the collectivism helps you be more of a person, more of an individual, more powerful. So that's what we found.
So thank you so much for that. I love that. Like we helped each other feel free. I love that. So wonderful. And it reminds me of this African idea of the Ubuntu, which is I am you. I am who I am only through you. Right. It's that's always this other direction that actually allows us to become sort of social persons. Steve, give us some wisdom. Tell us something about
I'll give it a shot. I like Deborah's answer. I would say maybe I'll take the low-hanging fruit in some ways, but I think it gives people courage in a couple ways. One, there's just an infinitely higher level of job security if you have a union than there is if you don't, and that makes collective action a lot more possible. So that maybe is just a really obvious one. I mean, I'd also say though, on the courage angle, it also, when you're part of a union, and I think just part of a group, but also, particularly part of a union, it's much easier to do things that you're not comfortable doing, like confront the boss, stick up for yourself, stick up for others, all these sorts of things that I think a lot of people, I was president of our union during the pandemic, and I'm chair of our bargaining team. And I'm even often surprised that faculty with tenure are very conflict avoidant and don't want to do that. But when in a union and when you're sort of surrounded by folks that are on the same page and you're working towards it, then it sort of changes. And then I guess I just also wouldn't underestimate rage and anger as sort of a good motivator. Only in the sense we're certainly feeling that, I think, right now at universities. I'm part of this group that is trying to organize across universities in the Boston area, of which, of course, there are sort of an unlimited amount, it feels like. And they're mostly not, all the other ones are elite private universities. None of them are, I don't think, faculty are not unionized, but they've had, just a flood of people jumping into chapters of the AAUP right now quicker than they can kind of, you would ever think. And a lot of them, of course, are not in your traditional areas of activism like the liberal arts and the humanities, but are in the sciences as they're seeing, research funding gone after, but also just science in general being attacked. So there's something to be said, I think, for rage and anger to motivate people as well. I'll just leave it there.
Those are great answers. And I think that part of that experience, you're right, that there's, first of all, the stability of it, the experience of it, but you're right, that in-group processes that are about solving social problems, there is something that happens to people where their fear doesn't become the leading thing, right? And I think what we're dealing with in this country is a lot of fear And actually, I'm gonna, how are we doing on time with our panel? How are we doing on time, Christina?
Sure, we are just about ready to tee up our next panel. But I wanted to mention, for those of you commenting in the Q&A box, we're not able in this Zoom webinar to take hand raises and bring people into the verbal discussion, but please open your Q&A box and type in your questions and comments. Our wonderful panelists will be responding and chatting with you as we go forward. But I do think that our panelists number 2 are ready and eager to get started.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for your wisdom and your reflection on practice. I'm so happy that you're here and that you're in the world, let alone anything else, that you're doing your work. And I know that you represent more than yourself. And that's one of the important points. All right, let's go to our second panel. And our second panel is community organizing and public health. And we're going to start off with Shafia, who will speak about I hope I got it right, Mbalia. I hope I got it right. I probably messed it up. I'm from New Jersey, that accent of mine always, and then I try to make you Latina, right? maybe you are Latina, right? So you'll be speaking about Southern Workers Assembly, thought processes, bottom-up planning, and participation as commitment to rank and file democracy, people's democracy, and social movement. Somehow I feel that like what we ended up in the last panel goes perfectly into the topic that you're talking about today. Please, my comrade, please.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here on the panel today. First of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah to guide my heart and guide my tongue. I know I'm going to have to speak fast in order to try to fit everything that I've got in this 5 minutes. But I want to, first of all, there are 2 things that I'd like to do. Brother Edgar, compañero Edgar, mentioned the ancestors. And so I just want to take a second to acknowledge who's in the room in terms of a couple of our participants, Kemi Kochiyama, who from the family of Kochiyama family, and Yuri Kochiyama, who was a stalwart in the Black liberation movement and in solidarity in terms of political prisoners and the Puerto Rican independence movement. And so I just want to acknowledge the strength, the power of her and her as an ancestor, and the impact that she had on me as a very young activist. I only got a chance to talk with Yuri a couple of times, but I'm so grateful for the time that she spent with me. The second thing is that there was one of the first questions about how can a individual health worker who's new into the profession, how can they be active? And I want to throw out that one of the things that Edgar mentioned is thinking outside the box and thinking outside the workplace. And so first thing I would like to recommend is you go on YouTube and look at the video, and you can start with the trailer, Dope is Death. When the Young Lords Party took over, along with the community, it took over Lincoln Hospital and began to develop a much broader view or much broader paradigm around community control of public health, and a new way of looking at and practicing people's health. And so I would make a strong recommendation that you check that out. There are healthcare cadres there are healthcare practitioners who are in the community who are building healthcare cadre to give assistance to communities in addressing healthcare issues. In addition to that, I think that it is key that we look at the development of healthcare cadre, healthcare institutions run by the communities, accountable to the communities, that are parallel and challenge the institutions of profit, that are using healthcare as their means of making money. So I want to say that also. So moving further on, I want to say that that I work both with the Southern Movement Assembly and the Southern Workers Assembly. And those are when we talk about methods of how can people impact on public health or other issues, the question of the development of new forms of decision-making, of people's democracy, of building people's democratic processes is something that is not only going on both in the community and in the labor movement, but also has not only now, but has a deep history, impact, in fact, a deep history, particularly within the Black community. The assembly process has these historic roots that go back even to slavery. And during slavery up in the North, you had the colored people's assemblies that were centered around abolition. In the 1940s, you had the National Negro Congress that was developed by the CP, the Communist Party, but had began to have deep roots in bringing workplace forces together in an assembly kind of a process and making decisions about impacting on the labor movement. In 1972, there was the National Black Political Assembly, where more than 7,000 Black people came together and put together a program, and it was representative of community organizations from the local block all the way up to citywide, countywide. In the late 70s, you had the Philadelphia Black Human Rights Agenda that was put together by an assembly process that took place, triggered by the opposition to Frank Rizzo, the hated Frank Rizzo, who wanted to run a second or third term. And the people mobilized, and not only in terms of building a united front to defeat that election or his attempt to do a pre-Trump. It also then went on and built an assembly process that went deep into the neighborhoods and brought out representation from motorcycle gangs, from neighborhood groups, from church groups, from labor groups, all across the community. And they put together something called the Philadelphia Black Human Rights Agenda. And it was used to challenge elected officials or those who were trying to run for office. In the Southern Movement Assembly came out of Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, when movement forces across the South, and I want to just make it, you know, a clear, I'm coming from the South, the non-union 1%, right, of workforce that is unionized, right? So we have a different view about how do we help build organization at the workplace? How do we deal with challenging the labor movement to come forward and help build union? And so the Southern Movement Assembly came out and building an assembly process that's going deep across the South to help people raise the question of governance and building people's assemblies that whether it is based on location or based on an issue, right, that brings together those forces who have a dog in that fight, whether they're in Savannah or they're in Idabena, Mississippi, or some other place across the South. They have the level of the right of representation to the assemblies. And then there's the People's Senate that is being built, and that came out of the 2021 People's Tribunal to the United Nations. We still charge genocide. That representation, and in fact, put oppressed people's liberation movements back on the agenda in terms of inside this settler colonial state, where the Puerto Rican independence movement was represented, indigenous peoples organizations, indigenous people were represented, the Black liberation movement was represented. And what they are trying to do now is to build a representative body that can bring forward people's issues that are not being addressed, of course, in the current state of the new Confederacy, whether you want to call it the new Confederacy or the fascist state, the authoritarian state, whatever you want to call that. But the point is, building people's democratic processes is going on. I think the significance is that we do recognize them as independent forces, independent motion that is taking place across the country, and it is beginning to find roots across the country. That there are decisions that raise the questions of power, that challenging power, as well as people seizing power. And even I think at this moment, Steve, that we can even say that this may be a teachable moment where more and more people are beginning to question the legitimacy of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. This is a teachable moment for those of us who see the need for independent politics to come forward. It is grounded on, or it is made on the groundwork, door to door, house to house, neighborhoods, block or local community. Also broad organizational representation, reflective of trying to build the broadest and intentionally working class forces, whether folks recognize as always what that is, and independent of the Democratic Party. Now, are they always independent of the Democratic Party? No, they're not. However, the intention is for many forces to be independent. And of course, without, as I think someone raised earlier, this question of level of the balance of forces, right? The leveraging in terms of being able to leverage power. I think the point that we're at is how do we leverage our work in order to gain power? And then lastly, and I'm trying to go fast, is that in the context of labor, and the labor movement, the Southern Workers Assembly is a movement, is a network of workplace organizations, unions, workplace committees that is building workers' assemblies across the South that are rooted in workplaces, building workplace committees across the South. And so that raises the question of rank and file democracy. It raises the question of building, how is a Southern movement built? How does the labor movement, which traditionally has abandoned the South, how does it come in, and what are the means, the technology that is used? The Southern Workers Assembly, in addressing healthcare issues during the pandemic, had a campaign around PPE called Safe Jobs, Save Lives, where workers across the South, whether they were in workplace committee, whether they were in unions, wore stickers that made demands at the state and local level, as well as the workplaces to provide adequate protective equipment on the job, and dealing with solidarity with workers who are forced to work, essential workers who are forced to work, for example, the Latino meatpacking workers in the South. So in other words, what we are working to build is a social justice union movement and get away from business unionism, where it's top down and we're trying to build from the bottom up. Based in workplaces and recognizing that one of the key things that labor has weaknesses, Achilles heel of many times of labor organizing, has been trying to organize in a vacuum, isolated from the community. The union flies in, they come in, they try to do an NLRB election, they don't tell anybody, nobody can give support, they try to do a campaign, they bring the workers into these captive audiences, they browbeat them, they threaten shutting down the plant. They use all kinds of mechanisms, including where plants have been located in the first place, right? And then if and when the campaign is lost, and usually with NLRB, they are lost because workers are put in this isolation from the rest of the community, and then the union is gone, and the workers are left by themselves and at the mercy of management. And management comes in and they decimate In fact, they've identified the leaders, they've identified the organization. There's not strong organization that has been developed that can withstand that kind of onslaught. So what we are trying to do is to build from the bottom up and build organization that can not necessarily, in fact, we're not even looking for NLRB initially. The question is, the objective is building organization where workers can define what their issues are, when they can fight, how they can fight, at the level that they can fight as they build stronger and stronger organization. And so at that point, I will close out. I probably run over, but I hope that I've been able to add some more to the conversation. And again, I appreciate the being included in this. We will be having a Southern Workers Action Summit that those folks who are working to build a labor movement across the South, workers who want to make a change, June 13th to the 15th in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And folks can find out that information at southernworker.org. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I was so excited about this panel and excited about that I forgot to give you an introduction, sister. So I'm going to do that right now. Shafia Mbalia is a retired postal worker, like my cousin. She is a member of Black Workers for Justice, a founding member of Muslims for Social Justice, praise be the UMass, and director of the Community, a developing educational institution focused on developing and promoting Black working class leadership as part of the US-based National Black Liberation Movement. And we know that Black Liberation Movement is always already Pan-Africanist. So that means that we're part of diaspora, right?
Actually, the Black Liberation Movement and the labor movement.
And the labor movement. So thank you so much. I have a, well, anyway, I'm gonna do the other bios and then we'll get to questions. Rita Valenti is a retired nurse. She's a member of the coordinating committee of the People's CDC, a co-founder of Project South. Someone who's always telling me I should be living in the South and organizing there. A member of Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective and a member of the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, one of my favorite organizations. Rita will speak on public health with a Southern lens, from Hurricane Katrina to assemblies. And of course, Rob Wallace is an evolutionary epidemiologist at the Agroecology and Rural Economic Research Corps and Pandemic Research for the People. He is author of several books, including Big Farms Make Big Flu and The Fault in Our SARS, COVID-19 in the Biden era. And Rob will speak on how science can help communities organize public health and how communities can help science in return. Rita, my sister from the South, though she began in the Bronx, please.
Thank y'all so much. Thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Rob, my sister Shafia, the other panelists, Joe, Steve, and Deborah, Christina, for the work you're doing here. I'm just like Shaf, I'm very honored to be here. And I wanted to start with a recognition that 20 years ago this summer, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, hit Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And we learned a lot of lessons from that, but there's two lessons I want to highlight. First is that the government's not coming to save us. The government is not coming to save the working class, especially the section of the working class that's too poor, too sick, or too old, that deemed of value, having the value to be rescued and returned and made whole. And then the second thing we learned was that climate crisis, global warming, would be the defining experience of our lives. And I can't emphasize how important I think that is and how much those climate justice organizations are under attack now, particularly those that are Black-led. So I ask you all to pay attention to that and to support our brothers and sisters that are paving the way for a new world. Since Katrina, and as Shafi talked about, we both work with the Southern Movement Assembly. The Southern Movement Assembly and People's Movement Assemblies have been building throughout the South. Movement building organizations have literally hosted hundreds of Southern Movement Assemblies, creating a safe space for people to come together from the grassroots, bottom-up leadership, voices, and experience who are confronting power in the front lines of struggle, whether that struggle is against the violence of white supremacy, be it state or be it extra legal violence, whether it's for the struggle for climate justice or for health, education, solidarity, labor organizing. We've been coming together for a number of years to develop a process of collective decision-making with the goal of being able to develop parallel governance. And one of the mechanisms that we often use in Southern movement assemblies and people's movement assemblies is a process called consciousness, vision, and strategy. And I just want to talk about that for a second, because these are facilitated spaces where somebody is not lecturing, but where together we are recognizing that we're all bringing something to the table. We're rooted in Paulo Freire's processes and thinking about collective political power. And so consciousness is really a look at what are the conditions that you're facing now? What is it that's going on in your community or your union or your front line of struggle? And what's the history? How did we get there? What is the root causes of the problems that you're facing? And more often than not, we're talking about an extractive economy, a racist economy, a capitalist economy in terms of root causes of the crisis that we're facing. And the second part of that is vision. You know, what is possible now? What can we actually achieve? What do we know to be true? That scarcity is not the basis of this society anymore. The problem resides in distribution. And why not? Why can't we build a collaborative, cooperative, loving, creative society with the capacity to heal our human relationships and our relationships to the earth? And then the third thing, and the most important, and I think what this is largely about, is strategy. How do we get there? How do we get to the other side? How do we build the kind of society that's now not only possible, but absolutely necessary? We cannot continue, and there's nobody here that's on this call that would think we can continue the way we are and have healthy and wonderful lives. So when COVID hit in 2020, the movement assemblies, the people's movement assemblies pivoted to a lot of online assemblies and political education. We took up safety measures, like Shafia was saying, door-to-door, mutual aid, who's locked in, who doesn't have money to go get that food, you know, all of those questions. That was, you know, that was a lot of the work that we were doing, as well as recognizing that the Biden administration had also thrown science under the bus, that the notion that public health, your health is in your hands. And this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. All of these principles that run absolutely contrary to public health were raised up during Biden's administration. And the People's CDC was born as sort of an online mutual aid to provide trusted scientific information, trusted data, and more than anything else, how do we keep ourselves safe? And how do we move forward during the pandemic? And then once again, when it began to be a little safer to get back together, we pivoted again and started to have in-person meetings and developed a series of protocols about how those meetings should actually happen to keep ourselves safe. I can go into different examples. I think most of you probably know these, but, you know, testing every day, we made masks available, avoiding crowds before you come, test before you come, KN95 masks, N95 masks. And we also created teams at these movement assemblies that would monitor the health, the pulse, and really the trauma of the experiences that we're living. I mean, you know, we've seen this trauma forever. I mean, and Shafia was brilliant in her analysis that these movement assemblies came out of deep, long history. They weren't just born in 2020, but they were re-energized and recreated at a higher level. That's, I don't want to take up too much of y'all's time. I do want to say, sort of in closing that, we're really at a nodal point in this society. I don't think that anybody here would deny that. And I would think about that nodal point as a revolutionary opportunity. We certainly cannot continue along the lines that we have. We're moving from a society that was based in industry to a society that's based in digital technologies. And what is the future that we can have? We can have a future of peace, of love and cooperation, and confronting the inequities of this society that have held us back for so long, and elevating those public health principles that are the same principles that guide the People's Movement Assembly and the Southern Movement Assembly. So I want to thank you all so much for being here, for hanging out this long, listen to so many people talking, and still you got to hear Rob, who's absolutely amazing. And thanks again.
Rita, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. Yeah, wonderful. And so many questions I have. Re-energize at a higher level. I'm going to take that with me today. All right, Rob Wallace, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And Shafia and Rita, thank you so much for your presentations. And they speak exactly to some of the things I want to talk about today. And I'm going to speak largely from the vantage point of the scientists and participation and things like this. And I said at the top of the webinar that Pandemic Research for the People aims to bring scientists and community members together to work through questions about COVID from the vantage of everyday people, as well as now for other possible pandemic pathogens. And you'll see in the resulting dispatches that PrEP has published that they aren't written in professional jargon, but they're not written in baby talk either, because the objective here is to take people out there who are interested in these topics from 0 to 60 in terms of learning the material and arriving at enough of an understanding to weigh in on decisions about these topics as much appreciated equals on so-called scientific topics. I mean, I think clearly many of the things that Shafia and Rita spoke to speak directly on the nature of the pathogens and how they evolve and spread and things like that. So this has been really a firm underlying issue in terms of how we approach the nature of studying these pathogens. And so it's critical to have these conversations in order to understand the nature of this virus that is microscopic. And as one colleague put it, if every cook can be a ruler, then every cook can also be a philosopher or a scientist. And unfortunately, though, in terms of the other direction, many scientists, unfortunately, see themselves solely in part of the ruling class. And this has been a terrible long post-war history that with Trump firing everybody and killing their grants has been something of a splash in the face. But many of us who were marginalized beforehand understood that science and as a form of as a method in ruling as a long and terrible history. Science and capitalism emerged together, and scientists were in the business of decoding new landscapes and peoples that were encountered in the colonial experience, decoding them, and then recoding them back into for commodity production. So there has been a long history of that. And so even among the most progressive scientists of the day, they are bent by their work culture bent by grant deadlines and tenure track obligations to parachute into a community, scrape off some data, and flee back to their labs. And we can see the societal context promotes such nasty habits, even among the most conscientious of scientists. So evolutionary biologist Richard Lewontin noted that scientists are part of society long before they ever became scientists. Louis Althusser identified this ethos as the spontaneous philosophy of the scientists. They can't but act how they are raised. That is, that many a scientist presumes is either that either part of their method or the natural order of things is really a set of, indeed, in fact, a set of deeply socialized and often class-specific instincts. So, for instance, among climate researchers, philosopher Lorraine Code identified the widespread gesture of sovereign individualism. So entire cohorts of scientists are trained in concluding that science is best practice as if you're isolated in the greater world. Mike O'Done followed up Code's work, finding among scientists a related response skepticism opposed to collective action. And we wonder why scientists lost on climate change. So these instincts find their way into the core of their scientific practice. In other words, there's a madness to their methods. One such method, Hume's guillotine, in which you're not supposed to confuse what you wish for what is indeed a wise cautionary at the heart of much of the work we do in science. But such principles are also false in foundational ways. So whereas new scientists are taught in the classroom the wonders of testing hypotheses with data, in the lab, many new scientists are also inculcated into the dark arts of conducting a line of research, avoiding professionally difficult questions. How else, if I may be so unfair, to score the grant from Ecolab or NIH or those junkets from Cargill or Hormel? And the methods upon which answers can be arrived at are somehow confused with the kinds of questions scientists are supposed to ask. So questions that even by a long chain of thought and action eventually benefit the money bags or empire paying for their answers. So science for people is a completely different thing. That's something else entirely. Like we learned doing our work with the Midwest Healthy Ag Project that it's best when you meet with community members, in this case, farmers and supply chain workers and food activists, to discuss the nature of the problem from the very beginning, to help co-produce the research questions we all wish to address. And this requires grasping that expertise comes in many forms. And I think we've heard that today. I can't do this kind of work. I'm not a farmer. I don't know anything about farming. It'd be ridiculous for me to engage in how farming produces pathogens that might kill 1 billion people without speaking to people who actually get their hands in the soil about it. So we need expertise from different vantage points. It isn't just in the classroom. It isn't just on campus. And also this, that scientific understanding moves at the speed of mutual trust. We have to be able to learn to work together, and that takes time. And your grant due date is not going to be the cutoff point, and no community group would want to work with that. It's absurd. And so we have to start to see ourselves as part of the communities that we are practicing with. And so for this latest prep dispatch, we worked together for a year, on like high order modeling of political scientist Amartya Sen's work on modeling collective choice. And then we talked through how it might help us think about the variety of ways different groups arrive at decisions together. And we've heard both panels talk about different ways, right? A union may come to a decision in a very different way, perhaps in a more formalized way, along with some informal ways than, say, a community assembly. There is some overlap. We do have, Rita wrote in the dispatch about the nurses union attending some of the community assemblies. And so that's the kind of thing we have to learn. Like how groups that think things differently or come to decisions differently, how do they speak to each other? How do they work together? What do they need to interface in a way that we can move in the direction of the kind of communal upheaval and large number of people we needed to defeat incipient fascism. And so now the models, they're just sketchbooks. They're just ways of us to think. We're not going to bring a model and say, hey, community group, do it this way. This is not how community groups figure things out. Life teaches them the ways and means by which to work through how to organize and get there. And but instead, this work can help better crystallize an understanding of the ways community groups make their own decisions, in this case, about public health. In other words, these models are again, idea sketchbooks to work out some possible ways that groups of humans might work together should the community care to think it through that way. Like if a group doesn't want scientists around, then of course, that's get out of town, right? We know. So, it's this notion that somehow we scientists have some handle on all things of the world is ridiculous. The natural order is not like that. We're very much in part about learning from people. So in other words, at its best, a science for the people serves as a place for theoretical practice, where everyday people can reflect on their life's accumulation of experience out there in the world. And we scientists can learn a lot from listening in, not just about that world, but the nature of our own science as well. And I'll stop there. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Wow, very powerful. Thank you so much for that. And I'm thinking, wow, this is so rich. And part of me is, it sounds to me like we're talking on some level about method in this sense that how do you get people together and what happens when they get together? And I'm thinking about Shafia's thing about governance. Governance or new forms of democratic governance at the level of the people's, the Southern Workers Movement, the assemblies that we're talking about. And then I'm thinking about Rita's sort of consciousness, vision, strategy, right? Like thinking and through this. And I'm thinking about Rob is really talking about from a type of political method to science that's aware that science is political, right? And that it has a fight, that has a dog in the fight, right? That it's not just from on high. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot in my work with labor unions and faith communities is the dialectic, right? What Marx taught us, the dialectic between discipline and freedom, right? And it seems to me like when our comrade Rita said we have to, re-energize these forms or at a higher level, I think maybe one of the things that we're confronting is, and I saw this in some of the marches, you see people like the Democratic Party will save us, burn down the Democratic Party, uneven and combined development both of consciousness and political practice, right? As an anthropologist, I know that ritual teaches you roots, right? And practice teaches you politics. And I think what I'm hearing is a new approach to this in coming from the grassroots. So I'm not asking a question. I'm sort of saying, does that connection make sense in your head, giving your practice and giving your point of view? And why don't we begin with Shafia? Or we can begin with Rita. Just like, why are you picking out me?
Shaf, you want to go ahead, honey?
Go, Rita, because you caught me in doing two brain things at the same time.
Go ahead, Rita.
I think one of the things about this session today is really beginning to also set the basis for having conversation about what is class. I mean, we talk about this billionaire class that clearly, is running amok, that is upending so many civil institutions in this society, some that have harmed us as well as helped us. I mean, there's no doubt that public health has that dual history of eugenics, but also free access to healthcare. So we have both of those things going on. And so I think part of our question is how do we stay in the room together? How do we actually not say my way or the highway? How do we actually hold the tension that we feel? How do we recognize and respect the different places that people are coming from? I mean, Joe's out of a trade union and a lawyer. Steve is an author. Rob is an author. Shaf is grassroots postal worker. I'm a retired, all of these different and different, not only different experiences, different cultures, different parts of the country. The necessity for us to begin to understand not only our differences and respect our differences, and particularly target inequality, right, which is the pillar that holds capitalism up. but also recognize our commonality. And how do we begin to express that? And, we've got all these new forces that are coming in. 10,000 people fired from CDC and NIH and all this. And like you said, Edgar, return to the Democratic Party will save us, this kind of thing. How do we show people this nodal point of history that we're at, where we can make a leap to the kind of history and world that we actually deserve? And I think that that's a question. And what we're offering, Shafi and I a little bit today, is this assembly process, which can be applied at work, but it's not the only one. The point is, let's recognize these collective processes and have these discussions.
I kind of missed the essence of the question, but in bouncing off of Rita, I think there's the process, and then there's the search for, and of course the process has to look for commonality, right? And figuring out a process for addressing with respect those differences that do exist, right? Without losing, without centering those differences, but centering the commonality. I think the other piece of this is that something I just put in the chat is that in moving around with different forces and thinking back also to the pandemic, that there's a deep need and a call for political education. The pandemic divided communities in ways that I have never seen before. And people who had, were prior to that, quite rational and logical and strategic, all of a sudden went off the rails, right? And it was quite emotional and rigid about it. So there's a real need, for example, that political education in all forms, in all methodologies, in all platforms, right? That includes the politics of health, right? Healthcare, but recognizes the, what's colonial, what's not, how, the question of ownership and people's ownership, whether it is of their bodies as well as their information, so that that the scientists have a clear role to play, not just because, but in getting out and figuring out how to translate what you said. We're not talking baby talk. We're not looking down on folks, but at the same time, we are respecting people's intelligence, but everybody doesn't learn the same way. And so we talk about different methods, different platforms. What is it? But there's this deep need, and people are asking for it, especially young people are asking for the information. And so I think that all strata of us who are, for example, in the room now, the provision of serious methods, multiple methods of education, multiple methods of figuring out how to get folks in the same room, in the same place, kind of thinking about what are the common threads in the problems that they're looking at on a daily basis, and breaking it down to that, and giving folks tools to be able to and that's hard, because the hardest thing is also, how do we get from from where we are now to the revolutionary change that we say that we want? And that's the, the next. I yield.
Thank you. Thank you. That's right on the money. And Rob, why don't you, I know we're running out of time. We have run out of time, but I've never been to a church service. They didn't run out of time, but it's a church, but it's church for me. So go ahead,
preach.
and I'll do some last words.
Yeah. I'll just make it brief and just say I entirely agree with Shafia and Rita on this, and I was for a couple decades a radical scientist, but only in the course of working with community groups on a regular basis do as a scientist, things open up differently in science, and so I'm still want to collect data, still want to test hypotheses, still natural scientists, but now we see the objects that we're looking at, pathogens and outbreaks and stuff, in a whole different light, in a different way, and different notions of what is possible, different questions to ask, and by virtue of speaking with people who are on the ground dealing with it, whether meat packers or farmers or anyone else involved in this, and it really changes the nature of the science that we're looking at. So I'll just end there and just say this is exactly why we did this dispatch, because we wanted to learn how different ways by which collective decision-making comes about. And we learned from the first panel the ways and means by which unions go about doing this. We learned in the second panel how community assemblies do it. There is, of course, crossover in many ways. Shafia and Rita are retired from postal working and nursing, and of course Deborah and Steve and Joe have been doing community organizing as well. So, but how do we learn to speak? How do the different groups, as Shafia was getting at, learn to look at each other, say they do things somewhat differently, but let me learn from them how they do this, and how do we communicate with each other so we can start moving strategically? And I'll stop there.
And I guess I'm gonna wrap up, but I see that Steve opened up his mic. So Steve, do you want to say like a minute? We don't have a lot of time, but you can have a minute.
That was totally an accident.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm just gonna stop. I'm just gonna end here. My mother used to take care of the kids of the women who worked in the factory after she left the factory. And when I listened to her, I understood that she was a midwife in many ways for single Latina and Black working class mothers. And I think our role now as the left is to be the doulas of a new society, both death doulas in terms of the settler colonial nation state and the empire, and life doulas in terms of the new kind of formulations we need to create a society that is not ridden by the profit drive, but is written by resources and a life drive. So I'm going to leave you with that. We're going to do some music. Y'all were brilliant. I don't know what to do. I feel like going to you and spending time with you and interviewing you as an anthropologist. But I want to thank Christina. I want to thank Shafia. I want to thank Rita, Rob, Deborah, Steve, Joe, and I see Roderick over there hiding. So I want to thank him because he's one of the major troublemakers here. And I'm going to send you love from East LA. Alante, alante, siempre alante. Always forward, never back. Comrades, thank you.
Thanks all. I'm going to sign off, but really appreciate it.
Steve, I got to read your books. I got to read some of your books. Great to meet you, man.
Likewise. Yeah, it was really nice group.
Centrality of labor to public health. I really like, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.